probably my favorite way that I've heard it worded was a woman that she was actually a survivor of trafficking, and she came to speak to a lot of the staff. And she talked about her story, framing everything through the perspective of your vulnerabilities. Because I think a big miss in the trafficking kind of awareness thing usually is that we think, oh, trafficking happens to very poor people in Latin America. We're like, we don't realize it is maybe the kid next door, because ultimately the thing that is common amongst all of us is vulnerabilities. We all have vulnerabilities.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to my podcast. Today, my guest is a young woman that I met not long ago in Washington, D.C. Her name is Morgan Daughtridge. Morgan is a mechanical engineer. She's still very young, but she's had many different positions and traveled widely in the world, and also has a deep understanding of religion in her life. And I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. We talked about lots of things. We talked about human trafficking, about prayers, about a house church that Morgan began in DC during the lockdowns, traveling, following God. Anyway, thank you very much for joining me, and I really hope you enjoyed this conversation. Hi, Morgan.
Hey, Tammy.
Do you want to do a quick prayer? Would that?
Yeah, I would love that.
Okay, I'll pray.
Oh.
Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
So beautiful, Tammy.
Thank you for coming on to my podcast. We've only met once, but it was a really interesting meeting. We went out for a boat ride and then had a little bit of lunch together, and it was really nice. And I asked you if you'd come on my podcast. You seemed like you had lots of experience in life, and so I thought this might be helpful to the people who are listening today. So if you would start, maybe you could talk just a little bit generally about your mechanical engineering, and then taking you into the space industry and nuclear energy, and just that journey there to start, so they know kind of who you are.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for having me. It is very exciting and cool that we only met once and you were willing to have me on. So yeah, my name's Morgan, and like you said, grew up in Maryland and then studied mechanical engineering down at Clemson. They actually didn't have a nuclear minor, but I was so adamant about it. I met with the president and I was like, do you think we could make something work? And so we did. And that ended up being a kind of a big part of my studies as well. And so started off first working for BMW, which was quite awesome because they put me in the unit that was their test driving unit. And so I went from driving my family minivan to these BMWs around the Talladega test track, which was awesome. And then from there, I actually moved to Germany to work for BMW there as well. And so it was pretty cool. You get to go through these like racing license programs to become sort of like a racing test driver, and they just get more intense as you go along. So when I took the test in Germany, he says, go to the skid pad, and I go and the car starts spinning out of control. And I look over and the instructor has his own little gas and brake that he's messing with on the side. Like, this is impossible. But then after that, at one point, I've just always had sort of a deep conviction about wanting to help people. And while I loved working at BMW, I didn't feel like I was making some sort of impact. And so I thought about quitting engineering altogether. But I actually talked to my dad, who had heard of a company called OneWeb, and he said, you can keep doing engineering and help people. This company was really cool. They were trying to create a global constellation of satellites to have internet access everywhere, especially in remote places. And they were willing to give away internet access to remote schools. And so I felt like, okay, that lines up with sort of the heart I have for international work, and then also feeling like the engineering was being used to give back in a way. And so I applied for that job, which was a little funny as well because I had none of the qualifications they were looking for. And so I had to write a letter to HR, and I basically was like, "Dear HR, I recognize I didn't study spacecraft engineering. I don't have a master's. I didn't go to one of these schools. I've never even heard of STK. It was like this orbital modeling software they wanted us to be certified in. So, but here's why I think I could figure it out." And they thought it was funny. So they gave me an internship, and that eventually led to a job. And then that company sent me to, all over, but we would do our spacecraft launches out of a Russia operated base in Kazakhstan. So that was a lot of interesting experiences as well. That company ended up going bankrupt during COVID. And I started for another company, which is where I work now. It's called Metrea Aerospace.
I see.
Yeah.
Wow, that's great. But what do you think was going on that, when people think, what should I do in life? People never know what to do in life. And they think, well, I'm going to become a doctor. So they have a goal. They become a doctor. Yeah. But sometimes it takes 10, 12 years to become a doctor. And a lot can happen in the middle of that. Did you have a goal, like a vision? You had a vision, right? It was to help people. Really?
Yeah.
That was your vision. And so how do you think everything that you've done has played into this vision of helping people? Because I always think that everything you do is helpful. Doesn't matter what it is.
Yeah. And I think that is such a good point. I think that's what it took me a little longer to learn. And so even starting at the beginning of your question, that was me, the all over the place. Do I do this? Do I do that? I think I changed my major. I ended up with probably 4 minors only because I changed my major so many times. I just accumulated credits left and right. But you're right. I had that core vision. I want to help people. I want to feel like I'm making a difference. I want to be challenged. And I think young people sometimes get caught up on having such a specific vision of, I want to do exactly this. And some people know that, they're like, I want to be a pediatric surgeon or something. It is very specific and there's specific steps to get there, but that is not all of us. And so if you have such a specific vision, when you don't reach it or you don't know how to reach it, you can become so frustrated. And so I think it's helpful behind the specific vision to instead just have these guiding principles that it's like, I don't know exactly what I'm going to do, but I have a willingness to do anything as long as it lies within these parameters. Like, this is my value structure. This is what I feel like I need as a person. For me, it's to be learning constantly, to be challenged. My value framework is a lot around Jesus and just a core drive to help people. And then from there, I think I just had a willingness. I thought, hey, I'm in my 20s. I'm going to do everything. I got myself involved with so many things at Clemson. And if there was something I maybe wanted to see that wasn't there, I just started it. There was I kind of go on a lot of rabbit trails, so definitely stop me if you need. But there is, I noticed a lot of international students at Clemson, and I noticed they all hung out in their own groups. And I knew that I wanted to do work one day that would be international. And so I thought, okay, I'll just start where I'm at. And I put myself in their shoes. If I was studying abroad in Italy, I wouldn't want to hang out with just Americans. I would be there to get to know Italians, And so I see a lot of our international students were from India, and they would hang out in these groups all kind of isolated. And so I thought, all right, well, I can help fix that. I'll try to be a bridge. And so I just started to think, what are the needs of these students? A lot of them come over from India. They might not have a car. And so I started a little grocery buddies program where I could get some of my friends to drive them to the grocery store. And then during those rides, people would interact. During our fall break, it's only a 2-day fall break. And so most of the students from South Carolina go home. But, if you're from India, you can't fly all the way home in 2 days. And so I thought, okay, I'll take them camping, which was quite interesting because I personally had never been camping, and they did not realize that until we got there. But just,
how many people went with you that day?
Over 20. And so I just kind of went around and found local organizations that would donate a tent or something. But I guess back to your main question, there's a story in the Bible I think about a lot when it comes to at least me personally in terms of what I'm doing next, and I guess how to mitigate that like frustration that could arise of I want to do this specific thing, and how do I get there, and how do I live a surrendered life to say I'm surrendered enough to do whatever the next thing is, even if it's not the specific thing I had in mind.
Mm-hmm.
It's when Abraham has to sacrifice Isaac, you know, he has this vision in mind of having a child, and he has this promise from God it's going to happen, and he's working towards it, waiting, praying, whatever. It eventually comes, and then God, of course, asks him to sacrifice Isaac. And this is the part I find so interesting. God asks him to sacrifice Isaac. Abraham says yes. Abraham goes through all the preparations. He gets Isaac. He tells his wife, Sarah. They travel for 3 days. They hike an entire mountain. He probably settles in his heart, okay, this is what I'm going to do. He ties him up. He goes through all that heartache, effort, resources, time, only to get to the top of the mountain, and God says, okay, never mind, don't kill him now. And we often read that story and think, oh yeah, I'd be relieved. But on some level, just on a principle level, God told him to do one thing. He starts the journey towards doing it, never finishes it. And the next thing, God himself turns around and says, never mind, don't do that. And I think most of us, that would actually really frustrate us. You know, we're like, if God gave me this word to do something, I'm going to keep going, and not, it's harder to accept, okay, God told me to do this yesterday. I start putting my time and resources to it, and now God says, okay, go a different direction. That's actually, I think, sometimes really hard for us.
Yeah. Yes. You know, when I was young too, I went to university, and I thought, okay, I'm going to university. I took a year of arts, and then, but I was in Montreal, and it was French separatism was very, very strong in the early 80s. I couldn't get a job. And I was paying my own way. So I left, and I worked for a year, and then I decided I'd go back to university. But I looked back to that first year and thought, well, maybe I'd like to pursue some of the, maybe it's drama I want to pursue. But by then things had changed, or I had changed. I was a little older. Maybe my brain was a little more solid by then.
Yeah.
And so then I went back to school again, and then no, I'm not ready yet. And then I worked for another year, kind of half time. And then I thought, I have to get myself doing something specific.
Yeah.
And I read a book called What Color's Your Parachute? And it guided at least my career choices towards the sciences, the human sciences. And so I got a degree in kinesiology, but I had no idea what to do. And I could have been a bus driver. I could have been a gardener. I could have been a doctor. I just had all of these different ideas of what I could do, which happens sometimes if you're creative.
Yes. Yeah.
If you're more conservative, my sister, she wanted to be a nurse, she became a nurse.
Right.
My other sister, she wanted to be a pharmacist. She became a pharmacist. But I wasn't like that. I was very, more like my grandmother, open and excited, creative, interested in everything. And that's a very hard thing to navigate when you're 18 years old, because the world just seems interesting in every different direction, whether it's in a self-fulfilling way or in a giving way. It's all interesting, right?
Yeah.
But I don't think it really matters. Now that I'm older, you just go. Go. And like you said, live for the next moment. Not that you want what you want in the next moment, but what you see is important.
Right. I mean, 1,000 little good decisions will build a great decision or a great life. And so many people want to just have a great life tomorrow. It's like, if I can make a good decision tomorrow, if I can take advantage of the opportunities that are there. And of course, there's a level of discernment, what do you have capacity for? But at least for me, when I was 18, I mean, you have a capacity for a lot, and I ended up doing a lot of very random stuff. But it's funny, as I get older, I look back and a lot of it feels not that random, or it influenced me. I mean, my first trip abroad was, I had talked to a girl right before I was going into Clemson, and she told me she was going to spend the summer in Thailand doing anti-trafficking work. And I don't know, I was like, what is human trafficking? Like, what is Thailand? I had, no idea. And as she told me, I just got so excited. And I almost I like didn't know enough to know uh, I probably shouldn't do what I was about to do. But I thought, okay, if she's going to stop bad things around the world, like me too. And I ended up, I don't even know how, finding this very random job teaching surf lessons in South Africa to to kids. It was part of a nonprofit to help keep them off the streets. He would go to the schools during the day and then um, teach them in the afternoon. And so I remember telling my parents about it, and I think my mom was a little nervous, and my dad was more like, she doesn't have any money to even pay for this. Just let her try, like just see if she can go. Um, and I ended up emailing the president of the university, the dean of students, the dean of the College of Engineering, just asking like, hey, would they fund my trip? Um, and eventually it worked, and Clemson ended up paying for me to go to South Africa to teach surf lessons for the summer, which was made even more interesting and funny by the fact I had never surfed before. So I was having to take lessons at 6 a.m. and then re-teach them to the kids in the afternoon. And it was a lot of like, hey, it's better for you guys to learn by doing, and I'll just show you on the beach. But yeah, random stuff that doesn't seem like that builds to any specific pathway, but it shaped who I was. I saw things there. I saw different communities. I mean, I saw the
and
circumstances. Yeah.
you were successful.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, that's something. These small successes that we have along the way. You know, if you're a waitress in a restaurant or a lifeguard
Mhm.
at the pool, it doesn't really matter what you do as long as you
Yeah.
are successful at it. Then the next thing you do is going to be a little bit more complex, a little more
Yeah.
challenging. That's how you end up. It's just one little step at a time, right? Like
Yeah. Yeah.
if you try to get something that's far, far away and up high, there's no way to get there except for every day starting at the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. I think about that a lot as well, even just in terms of faith. Because I think sometimes like I can read the Bible and I think like, oh, I want to, talks about a good tree bears fruit. And I'm like, I want to bear fruit for God. It's like, what does that even mean? The only fruit really it talks about in the Bible is, the fruit of the Spirit, which is peace, patience, joy, gentleness, kindness. But I'm often not as focused on bearing those. I'm more like, I want to do something for God. But then it's funny because he more wants us to look like him. And I think about in First Corinthians somewhere, it basically says at the end of your life, you'll come and present your life to the Lord, and he will like take fire and drop it on everything that you've done. And it says all that was straw and hay and wheat, like basically things that don't last, it'll burn up. But the things that are gold, the things that you did that were eternal, that's going to remain. And then you're going to be able to offer that to Jesus. And it's just funny because sometimes we can get so focused on stuff that at the end of the day, it seems impressive or it's self-validating, but really it's straw. But that moment of kindness you showed to someone at the supermarket or that was gold, and that's what will really remain at the end. And so that's
Oh,
helped me.
yep, that's a good story. That's a very good story. So you mentioned this OneWeb uh, and the mission, and what inspired you to be a part
Yeah.
of that?
Yeah. I really, I think at the time I was at BMW, and like I said, it was a great experience. I went from driving my minivan to doing high speed
Mhm.
testing at Talladega. Um, but I kind of had the feeling, as you might at a huge company, that if I didn't show up for work tomorrow, BMW is still going to make cars. They're still going to sell their cars, and I wanted to feel like I was maybe at a bit smaller company and making a difference. I also really wanted to feel like I was helping people. Like I just, yeah, for me, I couldn't wrap my vision around, making cars was really changing the future. And so I was like, I need to be at something where I'm either helping people or it's a little more forward edge. And so my dad had found this company, OneWeb. And so a really interesting story started by a guy named Greg Weiler. He first started a company called O3B, which stood for the other 3 billion, because there's kind of 3 billion people in the world that don't have access to the internet. And in our, Western first world mindset, we might think, oh, that sounds nice. Get off the web. It's dangerous. But when you think about it practically, I mean, that means everything from their banking system to traffic lights to just getting news, getting basic information that has helped us in so many ways people don't have access to. And so OneWeb was trying to use satellite internet to provide this. O3B was trying to use fiber optics, but I don't think it really worked out super well. So they switched over to satellites with OneWeb. It's actually quite famous now. OneWeb and Starlink ended up kind of a whole history of overlap there, but now Starlink is quite famous for doing the same thing, global internet constellation.
But OneWeb is also giving the same service now?
Yeah, and as I understand it, I think OneWeb was first. They were partnered together in the beginning, and then something happened. Yeah.
And so how international is OneWeb in their service?
Yeah, I actually don't even know where they're at now. So in 2020, I was actually at the launch site in Kazakhstan, and it was a very interesting time. And we were launching 36 satellites a month was the goal. And so when you go to do a launch campaign, you'll spend, nearly a month at the launch site. And it sort of feels like a strange, like Russian summer camp, because you're there with a lot of Russian guys, because we were launching on a Russian rocket, and you have your security and you're on this compound, and they send a school bus to come pick you up and drive you out to the launch pad each day and then drive you back at night. And I guess kind of like we've been talking about that urge in me to always feel like I'm helping people. I thought, wow, we are in a very remote town in Kazakhstan. I want to go meet these people. And so I kind of convinced the security guards to let me go on a run at night. And long story short, I ended up meeting some kids. They were playing with a soccer ball, and soccer's an international language, so I just kicked around with them, and they're, motioning me, come this way, come this way. And so I followed them a little bit, and they end up taking me to meet their English teacher. And that was just really special because, I think it was special for her to get to like meet native English speakers, very remote town out there. And so she ended up inviting me and a couple others from our team to go and teach at her English classes. And so it ended up being a very funny time. You're out in this Russian run camp, you're working on the rocket all day. And then at night I would teach English classes. And even when I came back, I got to keep teaching them on Zoom to these Kazakh kids. But at some point, I guess COVID started to become a bigger and bigger thing in the US, but we were so isolated. I mean, I barely knew about it. I told my boss after my month there, I was going to go spend some time in Korea, and he called me and he goes, you can't do that, not right now. And he said, they're thinking about shutting flights down to the US. I said, no way. Like, we were not getting this news. And so we ended up getting kind of emergency evacuated from there. I think we were on the last flight back from London into the US, end of March 2020. Mm-hmm. And it was pretty interesting because on the flight back, I think it was, I had a dream that the founder of OneWeb got on one knee and he took like a red and yellow pill that said COVID, and he died. And I remember waking up and thinking, if our CEO was really going to die, I would have been more sad in the dream. It didn't feel like he died. It felt like the company died. Mm. And so I started telling some of my coworkers, I wonder if we're going to go bankrupt. And just a week later, we had an emergency all hands, and it turns out we went bankrupt. And so it was interesting though, but because of the dream, it kind of opened the door to get to pray with a lot of my coworkers who, as you can imagine, it was quite a shock for them, and
yes,
pretty hard to, yeah.
Well, I know so many people now who are not doing what they were before the pandemic.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Everything has changed.
Yeah.
And it's probably going to change more, but there's been big changes happening.
Yeah. Yes. 2020 was definitely, felt like a hinge point in a way in my life. I mean, right after we went bankrupt, I was sort of like, okay, Lord, how do I spend my time? Do I start looking for a new job right away? What do I do? And I felt very clearly, he said this phrase, I guess came to my heart. Do my work and I will give you work. Which is nice in the faith sense, but it's different when you tell your friends and family, yeah, I'm not going to apply for a job. I'm just going to do God's work. They're like, what are you doing? But it ended up, at that point, I had traveled maybe to 60 countries or so. And I really felt like I was thinking about how COVID was touching different countries around the world. In some places, I mean, in many places, but in some places, really, it was very, very bad. People were really, really suffering. And I thought, I can't travel to them, but how could I provide something? And so me and two friends, we ended up doing, we would just do this weekly Zoom call, and we would gather essentially friends that we had met from around the world during our travels. And we I don't know what we advertised it as, but people came, I guess, because they're lonely and they're kind of locked up. And so we would always just have just different games to play, facilitate people getting to talk and meet each other. Because you have a guy from, Pakistan and a guy from Kazakhstan and a guy from Latin America all on this call. And then we would just encourage people at the end and ask how we could pray for them. And that ended up being very interesting. Do I have time to share a very random side story?
Sure. Please do.
When I had been in Nepal a year prior, maybe, Nepal is not overly friendly to like proselytizing, as they would call it. And so I actually wasn't doing that, but I had been walking around with my Bible. I just usually have it when I travel. And the police actually took me, sounds traumatic, but, pulled me aside and had me come with them. And when this was happening, there was a local boy that watched this happen and clearly saw I was a tourist. And that boy, I do not know what possessed him to do this, but he followed us to the police station. And when I was at the police station, it was actually going quite well. I convinced the police officers I could teach them English, and I was having them practice their English from the Bible. And so I'm like, all right, this is going great. But this boy came and said, hey, she's with me. She's actually visiting us. She's a foreigner. She doesn't know what she's doing. And the police released me to him. Now, I couldn't understand anything that he said. Next thing I know, they say, you can go. And they're saying, go with your friend. And I'm like, who are you? And we start talking. I mean, he's maybe 14, 15. And he says, come meet my family. I see that you're visiting. Come meet my family. And I'm like, okay. And so I follow him through the streets and we go to his family. His family owns this little shop, that they have there. They sell little waters, little snacks, whatever. And I remember it started to pour. So it wasn't a good time to leave. And so me and his little sister and his brother, and I think his mom was there, not his dad. We sat huddled in that little shop, just talking. He spoke pretty good English, translating for hours. And
oh, wow.
I kept trying to share Jesus with them. I'm like, this is why I had the Bible and this is what's going on. And I remember we had the best time and we talked and we laughed and we discussed, but the whole time he was not interested in the slightest in anything I had to say about Jesus, and was not, not interested at all. And it felt, in a way like, kind of your words are falling on deaf ears. It doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
We'll circle around to COVID when we started doing kind of this online group just to help people connect during potential times of loneliness. He was one of the people that ended up joining the call. And one day I remember I prayed for everyone on the call that they would have dreams, just peaceful dreams where there's been anxiety or depression, that, they would just have peaceful dreams. And in my own story, I became a Christian because I met Jesus in a dream. So I prayed for that for people as well. And next thing we know, this guy from Nepal gets on the call the next week and he tells us he's had a dream of Jesus. He now fully believes. He gave his life to the Lord. And he ended up starting his own little Bible study in Nepal. And a year later, I followed up with him. That Bible study expanded. And so now he has 2 Bible studies going in Nepal. And it was so funny to me, because think of feeling like what you're doing is pointless. It felt so pointless, that conversation we had where I'm trying to share. And he's like, I don't care. And now a year or 2 years later, he's overseeing a Bible study. And so yeah, just an example of random things that happened during COVID.
Well, part of him wasn't interested, but there was part of him that was interested.
Yeah. Yes.
Know it, right?
Deep down.
So
Yeah.
You mentioned that you found Jesus in a dream. Can you tell us about that experience?
Yeah. I was pretty young. I remember I had a lot of nightmares, and I think even after that dream with Jesus, the nightmare wrestle was pretty strong. And I know a lot of kids kind of struggle with that. And mine were just really vivid. And I mean, my parents they'd have to sleep in my room. They'd have to block the door. I'd sleepwalk. I'd wake up screaming, like night terror kind of level. I remember my parents tried everything. They're like, eat before bed. Don't eat before bed. She's too hot. She's too cold. That's why. And I don't know why, but I remember one night my mom decided to read the Bible to me. And I don't know if she had just Googled a verse about sleeping or if it was random, but she read to me from Psalm, where it said, in sleep I will lie down, in peace, in safety I will dwell. And I just remember hearing that even as a kid and being amazed, thinking that was some big book for adults, but suddenly it was talking about the thing that I was scared of. I was scared to go to sleep at that point, and the thing that mattered to me. And so then that night when I went to sleep, I ended up having a dream where it was very simple. It wasn't elaborate. It was just this like very, very bright light. And it was like I could see a man in the light. It was hard to exactly make out, all his features, but the overwhelming sense of like peace and joy. And I remember thinking he asked me, "Do you want to be my friend?" But I also remember thinking like, we're already friends. Like it was like I had known him my whole life. It was just this very, indescribable kind of supernatural thing. But after that, I was different. I think about John 9, the guy who said, "I was this way and now I was this way." I was just different. I was so interested in the Bible. I asked my mom for a Bible, started reading it all the time. I would wake her up to ask questions. I kept having dreams, and those dreams continued throughout my life. Still do have a lot, and it still feels like a way that I can interact with the Lord. In college, I wrestled with it more. I really, there was a point I actually begged God to take away the dreams because felt like they were overwhelming, or I didn't understand what they meant, or, why was this happening? But just in a lot of prayer and reading the word and seeing, I remember when he showed me how Jesus is alive or was alive because his dad, Joseph, had 3 different dreams that saved him. I mean, I was like, okay, well, dreams are a gift. And so, learn to view them as a gift.
Yeah, well, they don't lie. Dreams don't lie.
Yeah.
So there's truth there.
Yeah.
And then when it's so complicated and difficult to understand, it's hard to tell what the truth is. It can be, it's a mystery.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm very lucky because I live with someone who can interpret dreams.
Oh, wow. Really?
Yeah, that's very helpful. Yeah. Yeah. Jordan
Wow.
can interpret
He interprets
dreams.
them.
Yeah.
Do you feel like he interprets them, maybe both or one or the other, more kind of with his own spirit of what he feels like it means? Or is it very like symbols from the Bible or other ancient texts?
No, I wouldn't say he goes, at least in the past, he hasn't gone that way. I don't know, maybe if that will change over time, but no, it's mostly listening. He listens and he asks questions. He asks questions and then I tell him what it means.
Wow.
But it's
Wow.
through the questions that he asks that I find what it means.
Which is so profound, because when Jesus would teach, he would ask these questions, and it started to just reveal the truth. The disciples would ask him a question and he would respond with another question. Like, what are you doing? But that's really wise.
Well, I think he believes,
reveals it.
and I share this thought that everybody knows who they are and what they ought to do, but they're not always conscious of it. So if you can ask, if you can, attend to the next right thing and know which questions to ask, maybe you can help them understand who they are. And dreams are like that, right? And I had a dream last week that at the end of our book tour, I had a dream. And sometimes I dream, not very often, but now and then I have a dream. I had the most incredible dream. Should I tell you this dream? It's
oh my gosh, absolutely.
I still have a lot of I still have a lot of questions, I guess.
Yeah.
So there were 2 dreams together. The first dream was I was walking on a cliff beside a woman. She was near the cliff and I was beside her. And her boyfriend was back behind us, but further from the cliff. And he was a man who'd been to the war and he was hurt. So he was a hurt man, or he was at least, but he wasn't as hurt as her because he wasn't as close to the cliff as she was, right?
Wow.
But even though he'd been to war and he was hurt, he was further from the cliff than her, which is kind of interesting in terms of symbolism, right?
Yeah. Yes.
So then it switches and I'm in this big room and it's very bright.
Wow.
And it looks like an airport, and I've been in lots of airports because I've traveled. So I'm standing there and this woman walks by me, not looking or anything. She walks by kind of in a way of a working manner that she's going somewhere, but she's holding onto a chain, and on the end of a chain on the ground, there's a bassinet, but it's made of wire, and there's a baby in the bassinet. And it's probably 6 feet behind her. But as she's hurrying down the corridor, the bassinet turns over and the baby falls out and starts
Wow.
to cry. So I go over and I pick up the baby, and the baby calms. And when I look up, the woman's gone. She's gone around the corner and she's gone. She hasn't stopped. She's just
Wow.
gone. And I think, is this my baby? I'm old.
Wow.
I'm old, but maybe I have a baby. And then I thought of
Wow.
Sarah, of course,
Yes.
Abraham's wife, and how when she's old she gets a baby. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I've got a baby. And I thought, well, this isn't my baby, but it's my baby for the moment. So, like,
Mm.
I'm here with this baby now.
Mhm. Mhm.
And then that dream goes back to the cliff dream,
Yeah.
where I have this woman, and she's impossible to talk to
Uh-huh.
in every way. I can't make heads or tails on how to communicate with her, and so I push her off the cliff. Push her off the cliff.
I didn't see that coming. I was tracking. I didn't see that coming.
Neither did
Okay,
I.
she's off the cliff, falling
She's
into the
off
abyss.
the cliff, and I watch her go down. And she hits the bottom way down there, and I see
Okay, wow.
people walking, and I think, I'm going to have to answer for this.
Oh my gosh! Wait, is that the end?
No, well, then the last
Okay.
scene is in a nice bright room again with big
Okay.
windows, so it's very white in there.
Mm.
And I'm sitting at a table, and my husband's there, but I haven't told him.
Mhm.
And her boyfriend is there, and I haven't
Mhm.
told him either what I've done.
Wow.
And then this chief inspector comes and he sits down beside me at the table, and he
Mm.
said, "Do you feel sick to your stomach?" And I said, "No." And I
Wow.
started telling him what happened and what
Uh-huh.
I did. And he said, and I named her. Her name was Lucy. I named her. And when I named her, he said, "Turn on the tape recorder." So I knew I was going to jail. And
Wow.
I felt fine about that. It was necessary.
Wow.
And
Wow.
so we talked about that dream and what it meant.
Wow. Wow.
And this is it's a dream. It's really a dream about feminism.
That's kind of what came to my mind. I was
Yeah.
wondering,
It's a
thinking
dream
about the
about
different.
what's going on with women now.
Yeah. Wow. Wow.
And it was time to it was time to deal with that issue.
Wow. Wow.
And maybe it's going to start a new relationship for me because there was a baby there.
Yeah.
Right? And
Yeah.
it would be a spiritual relationship, obviously, because it's a
Right.
dream.
Right.
So, like, what is going on, whatever is going on in society with women, it's pretty widespread.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty widespread that women are, they have some sort of, it's almost like a narcissism or something, that you said that you want to know what you can do for other people,
Yeah.
right?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And maybe what you can do for yourself tomorrow as well, because that's another person.
Yeah. That's a good way to think about it.
Right? And that's why we take care of ourselves, is because we want to be useful to whatever we can be useful for tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
But there's something about that, like castrating, narcissistic, resentful persona. I don't even know what to call it exactly, but it's deep. It's deep in women, and it's hard to get rid of. So,
wow, it's interesting.
Dreams are crazy, but they're more truthful than anything else.
Yes, yes. And I think for me, at least, it's like when I see them, sometimes they're so explicit. It's so clear. Do this on this day. And other times it's like this symbolism, and it's more like you hold it in your heart, like Mary, when the angel came to her, it says she treasured all these things in her heart and pondered them. I just love that verse. And so you ponder them, and the dream that means something today, 3 years from now, it's like almost evolved. And then I also find that, at least for me, I love Jordan's method of just asking questions. For me, I always just think, okay, what scriptures come to mind? And they might seem like random and disparate, but I kind of write them all down and then slowly let them form a puzzle. And I do not know why, but the moment that you said that girl was walking next to you and she was hurt, I thought of, and this is what I'm saying, it doesn't seem to connect, I don't know, but I thought of in the book of Jude, where they list out, sorry, I have my Bible here. They list out the things that the Lord is basically going to rebuke these people for. I'm trying to find the exact, like, woe to them. They walked in the way of Cain. They abandoned themselves for the sake of gain to Balaam's error, and they perished in Korah's rebellion. Like there's almost a 3-part thing listed out that the Lord is displeased with. And in this case, he uses the language, I'm going to rebuke you for it. And for some reason, that scripture popped to mind, and it felt a little bit maybe confirmed when you pushed her off the cliff that yeah, I don't know. I'm going to be digging into that after the call. I'm curious,
That's
like
very
what.
interesting that you say rebuke, because it's a spirit. It's for sure it's a spirit.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
it may need to be rebuked in
Yeah.
order to, and I guess maybe pushing somebody off the cliff, and that's rebuking in a way. I mean, if the dream is true, then that is what you have to do. You have to cast it out.
Yeah. And what's interesting about Jude is it says like the language, the Lord rebuke you, where it's almost like this is too big for me to take down fully. And so there's like an intercession of like, okay, the Lord needs to deal with this. And I wonder if there's something in the way he lists out the way of Cain, abandoning themselves to the sake of gain as Balaam did, and Korah's rebellion, because all 3 of those are major sins in the Old Testament.
I don't know all those. I know the story of Cain and Abel.
So Cain and Abel,
that's a resentment story for sure.
Resentment, jealousy, striving for your own gain. So we have that in Cain. Abandon themselves for the sake of gain to Balaam's error. So Balaam, I'm not an expert in any of this, but he was like a pagan prophet that they tried to pay to curse Israel. And he actually said, he goes, I can't curse them because I can't curse what God isn't cursing. But I think in his error, it was, I guess, for personal gain and I don't know, trying to take money. I don't know the details of his story, but
is that around the same time as nature worship?
Probably it's in I think it's the story of, it's in the book of Numbers. So it's when they're, I guess, still wandering in the desert on that time.
Is there anything else there too?
Yeah. And then Korah's rebellion is the third one. That's what lists that God's going to now rebuke these people for these 3 things, which is interesting because those 3 things happened way in the past, but God's rebuking them now. So it must be the spirit of those 3 things. And the Korah's rebellion is when, it's when there's a tribe, basically it's a sub-tribe of the Levites, and they rebel against Moses because I think they don't like the position that they've been assigned. And it's interesting, I guess now as we think about it, they're all sort of selfish gain stories. They basically tell Moses, we're going to take you down because we don't like the position we're in and we think we should be in a higher position. And then Moses responds in the opposite spirit where he humbles himself and says, let God judge. And God does judge, and all of Korah gets swallowed up in the earth. And so, yeah, it's interesting. There's something about, I think those 3 things tied to the girl you pushed off the cliff in terms of selfish gain, I guess.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Well, that is the sign of the times, that's for sure.
Yeah. And it's interesting how, like, even the book of Jude.
Travel to more than 80 countries.
What did you say?
How did you manage to travel to more than 80 countries? And how, you're not very old. 80 countries, that's a lot.
Yeah. I would say about 30 of them happened while I was at Clemson. That story of me emailing the president, I had seen some news article where it said Clemson was building a $55 million indoor practice facility for their football team. And I just thought, $55 million? I need $3,000 to travel. That'll be pocket change. I'll just send him an email and ask. Of course, the president didn't respond, but I went after, kind of his assistant, the VP's assistant. And I remember my email was on the basis of, at the time, Clemson was trying to do a push to be a top 20 university. And I made the point that Clemson is primarily students from the US, not a lot of international, whereas compared to other top 20 universities, there's a much higher percentage of international students. So I said, okay, we don't have that same student ratio, but you could pay to send students abroad like myself, and I'll come back with an international perspective. And it ended up all panning out. And by the time I graduated, I think Clemson, I don't know, give me $18,000 or something to just travel every summer, every break. I would work in different countries, English teacher in Indonesia, worked at the Olympics, helped start a nonprofit in Colombia. So that was a lot of it. And then it just it definitely continued after I graduated, both living abroad in Germany, getting to travel, and then in recent times, it's been a lot with an anti-trafficking organization that I serve called Unbound Now, and then also my church, Antioch. So,
Right. I've
yeah.
talked to a couple of UK families that
Mm,
are working towards um, saving kids who've been
yeah.
trafficked.
Wow.
And is
Wow.
that the kind of work you're doing?
Yeah. So Unbound
Mm.
Now, I can give you a little overview of them. It's an incredible organization. They were started in Texas out of Waco. Now they have 10 offices across Texas, another couple around the world. They've been around for a decade, and they operate mainly in three main areas. So one is the education side. So they have like incredible trainings that are, I think, even mandated in Texas to for medical professionals to use, or there's separate trainings just for lawyers, or separate trainings just for um, airline attendants. So these different people that, if you train them, they can become first responders to trafficking. And so, for example, after they did the training to all the medical staff in the Dallas Fort Worth area, the next year, trafficking increased in the city 700%. It didn't really experience a 700% increase. It was that there
They
was that
recognize it. Oh,
increase of identification. And so a lot of the victims that Unbound ends up serving are first identified either at a doctor's office or a hotel or the police. And so that kind of education area is a big victim identification lane. They also have, I love it, the trainings that we go and do in schools. Or I was just in Moldova 2 weeks ago doing sort of our juvenile detention center training packet, but I was doing it in women's victims' homes kind of thing. And you do these trainings, and even, I mean, there's a story of doing the training at a high school, and you say, hey, this is what trafficking is. This is what's okay. This is what's not okay. And you have students coming up after saying, I didn't know this was trafficking. My brother's been making me sleep with his friends because I have to earn rent to stay at our house. I didn't know, these young
mm.
kids get told that's okay. And so, um, but so we also have a drop-in center, and then we have a safe house as well in Texas. And then probably my favorite lane, which is just awesome. It's our survivor advocacy program. So we have these advocates that come on and they get trained and they serve as an advocate. And so when a victim is identified, and maybe they're at the hospital, maybe they're at the jail, maybe that advocate is going along with the police on a sting or a raid, that advocate will be, probably the first person that they see, and they do trauma informed interviewing, and they walk with them throughout their journey, whether it's court dates or doctor dates or getting a birth certificate or going back to school. And
Mm.
just incredible stories of over years, seeing people that were once victims now working for the organization, or attending one victim's wedding years later. And so it's really powerful.
So are there some indicators for people who are listening of
Hmm.
what to look for maybe in themselves, but also maybe in people that they love, that
Yeah.
they might be at a higher risk of
Yeah.
experiencing trafficking?
Yeah. I probably my favorite way that I've heard it worded was a woman that she was actually a survivor of trafficking, and she came to speak to a lot of the staff, and she talked about her story, framing everything through the perspective of your vulnerabilities. Because I think a big miss in the trafficking kind of awareness thing usually is that we think, oh, trafficking happens to very poor people in Latin America. We're like, we don't realize it is maybe the kid next door. Because ultimately, the thing that is common amongst all of us is vulnerabilities. We all have vulnerabilities. And of course, being poor is a vulnerability, or having a need, it's a vulnerability. But it's not just a socioeconomic thing. It's, hey, the girl at school that she doesn't feel pretty, and maybe her parents are immigrants, so she speaks with an accent, and that desire to fit in, that becomes a vulnerability. And so the trafficker that maybe comes to the school and poses as, a 17-year-old boyfriend, and then dates her for a couple months, and then invites her to an away weekend, and you don't see her again. There's things you say yes to because of a vulnerability or an insecurity. And so there's also a program we do with, it's identifying youth, not who are currently being trafficked, but who, there's a name of the test, but I forget it right now, that basically get a high score on this test for having vulnerabilities that could be exploited for trafficking. And so we'll assign kids like that a mentor to walk through over the next couple of years. And so I think just as a community member, because community really is the first line of defense, is being aware of like what vulnerabilities are around you, and then very practically seeing if there's, it's different in different places, but if in the airport you see a child that won't make eye contact with the adult they're with, there doesn't seem to be any physical resemblance. The adult is always speaking for the child. There's different little practicals like that. Me, one time I was in the bathroom of a gas station, and I just saw underneath the stall, I saw a bag, and very normal. I've changed in gas station bathrooms before, but she was rummaging around a lot, and she had been in there a while. And, I thought, what's the worst that could happen? I'll just have a conversation with her. So I start chatting, and I'm not necessarily thinking she was a trafficking victim right away, but I was just curious. And so just chatting. And after a little bit, I asked her name, and she gave me a name that was just very clearly fake. And so I just said, oh, it's a unique name. Did your parents give you that? And she said, no, that's what they call me. And so now I'm okay. And I asked her if I could come in the stall, and next thing you know, we're in there talking, and we were able to connect her with some of our local resources, because it actually happened in Texas where we have offices. But that was actually really beautiful. I remember just talking to her for a long time and asking her, I said, hey, can I pray for you? And I said, is there ever a moment that you thought maybe God could be real? Because sometimes it's hard to imagine God could be real when you're living in that sort of living hell. And I'll just never forget her answer, because she ended up telling me her whole story. Her mom was trafficked. She was born into trafficking. And she said, the moment I thought God could be real is when the judge sentenced me to prison time, because she got picked up by the police. Oftentimes pimps will make their girls do like, drug deals for them, drug trafficking, whatever. So they're used for that. And they end up accumulating a lot of crimes on their record. And so, she was sentenced to prison while she was pregnant. And she said, I knew God was real then, because when I was in prison, I was away from my trafficker, and I was able to give birth while I was in prison, which to her meant her child would be born not on drugs, because anytime she's out of prison, her pimp would keep her regularly on drugs. And so she felt like this is a sign that, even if God can't save me, maybe he'll save my baby. And I just was like, I was in tears. We ended up praying. She gave her life to the Lord, and we were able to kind of help her on her journey.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, that sounds worthwhile.
Yeah.
Right.
Great. Yeah.
Amazing how that came apart, and that you were there and she was there. These things, they don't happen. We think that those are coincidences, but there are no coincidences in God's world, are there?
Right. Especially when you're asking him, Ephesians 2:11, it says, I've prepared good works in advance for you to do. I read that verse. I said, go ahead and prepare a lot for me, God. I want to do them. I want to get to be there. It's like, what a privilege to get to be there the moment someone gets set free, gets healed, whatever it is, that's God's work. And it's like, write a lot down for my schedule, God. I want to do them, So I ask him.
Yeah. Do you ask him every day?
Probably not as much as I should, but I have 3 kind of daily prayers that I think, not since I gave my life to the Lord, because that was when I was very young, but at least since high school, that I've prayed just almost every day, like just waking up. And one of them is just very simple, like, Jesus, take me on an adventure with you. I've just asked that since high school, and he's been so faithful to do that. But the second one is, Lord, let me see people how you see them, not by their flesh, not by their sin, not by their past, not by their mistakes, not by their burdens. All those things are what we usually see people as, not by the stress or the attitude they're carrying today, but truly, like, help me see them by the Spirit, or how you see them, and maybe not even how they are now, but Psalm 139 says, when you were born, I wrote out a book of all the days of your life. Like, let me read that book, your best plan for them. And so I think that's, been a big part of.
That'll keep you out of trouble.
Yeah. Yeah. When I live by it. Yeah.
Yeah, when you live by it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, none of us are perfect, but we do our best, right?
Yeah. Amen. Lots of grace.
Mm.
Lots of grace. I was thinking yesterday, I don't know why I just thought of this. I think because you said none of us are perfect, about repentance. And I was noticing, this is why I love reading the Bible. There's just these crazy connections that it's like, even if you're a non-believer and you're just curious, like you might as well read it because it's so fascinating. Um, and and then you can take those ancient type stories and they suddenly become so applicable to right now. And the moment you see that connection. And so yesterday I just realized something. So 2 Samuel 24:24. It's where King David, man after God's own heart, loves God, great guy, pure heart. He ends up sinning. It's not his first time. He's already had Bathsheba moment, but he takes a census against God's will. And, God comes in wrath and he says, you have to be punished for this. Pick one of your three options, and David says, I'm not even going to pick. I just want to fall into the hands of the Lord. I trust you, God. You punish me however you see fit. And anyways, that whole journey leads him to go to, his name starts with a J, but I can't pronounce it, a Jebusa something. And he goes to buy his threshing floor. And he says, I'm going to buy this threshing floor in order to repent here. And Jebusa, I forget his name, but the guy who owns it, he says, oh, I'll just give it to you. You're the king. And David says, no, I will pay full price for this, because 2 Samuel 24:24 says, I will not offer to God a sacrifice which costs me nothing. So I must pay full price. And so that verse always stood out to me. But yesterday I was reading Genesis, I think it's 23, and it's where Abraham goes to bury his wife Sarah. And he's looking for a gravesite because he's no longer in the land of his people. God has called him to take this journey towards the promised land. And he doesn't have like a gravesite like you would typically have in those days already. And so he goes to some neighboring tribes or people and he says, hey, can I buy your field to bury my wife Sarah? And they actually say the same thing. The guy to David says, you're a king. I will give this to you for free. And David says, no, I must pay full price. They say to Abraham, they say, you are a prince among us. We will give you our burial sites for free. And Abraham says, no, but I must pay full price. And it just stood out to me because I thought, why did both men, both said, you're royal, you're a king, you're a prince, you can have it for free. And both said, no, I must pay full price. And I think my two kind of takeaways were, because there's such different situations. One is Abraham burying his wife. There's been a death. And the other one is repentance. They don't seem to overlap. But then when I was pondering it, I just felt like the Lord said, Morgan, David knew the story of Abraham. He referenced Abraham's exact words because David viewed that moment of repentance as a burial, as a death. And that's where I started to realize that would help me in my own life so much if I viewed repentance that way, that I have this heart of, I want to pay full price. Like I deserve to pay full price because I've messed up, and repentance isn't something with my words. It is a burial. I'm putting to death. Repentance is to turn away, right? So I'm putting to death that way about me. I'm putting to death like my anger. I'm putting to death my impatience. Like I'm putting to death, and I'm willing to pay full price for it. And then what's cool is the New Testament, as Jesus steps in, he goes, I'm paying full price.
Well,
I
that's
bought it for
exactly
you.
what my dream said, right? I murdered her, and I knew I was going to pay full price, and I thought, yeah, that's right.
Yeah. 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 You had that
In my
heart of
dream.
full price.
Oh
Wow.
yeah, huh?
Wow.
Yeah,
And what's
that's
interesting too
fascinating.
is both men, because they were willing to pay full price, it cost them more in the moment, but all their generations were blessed. That same threshing
Yeah.
floor David buys, Solomon builds the temple on. The same
Mm-hmm.
gravesite Abraham buys, Jacob, Isaac, Rebecca, Leah, all end up buried there. So there's something about being willing to pay full price that it like, I don't know, it becomes generational versus taking the
Yeah,
easy
I
way
think
out of I'll
that
take it for free.
that's why we're called to work on ourselves,
Yeah.
because then whatever we can put to death within ourselves that is um, away from what is true and best,
Mm-hmm.
then your children won't suffer those problems,
Yeah.
and your grandchildren.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
Yeah.
that's what else could be good to do? That's such a
Yeah.
good thing to do.
Yeah, we should repent.
Yes, that's right.
I like it. Yes, amen.
I
That's where I'm
agree.
at.
Yeah, I agree.
Oh my goodness.
Mhm.
Yeah, because you think about even with David and Solomon, David says, I want to build a temple. And God comes to him and says, um, hey, love your heart, bro, but you can't because you're a man of blood. And so then on the exact spot David repents, that threshing floor he buys, his son is then allowed to come build the temple. And so like, you're right. Like what David couldn't do, but he was willing to put to death was the exact foundation for his son to then go do all the things he couldn't do.
Right. Yeah.
Powerful.
Yeah. Very powerful. So you started a house church in
Oh,
DC.
yeah. Yes, yes.
Tell
Back
me
to
about
COVID.
your house church.
Yeah. So it's actually not currently running now, but
Mhm.
in just even circling back to our COVID conversation. So this is very interesting. During COVID, so March 2020, I come back, company's bankrupt. We start doing this online thing. Well, pretty soon, I guess it was April or May, I think May, when so George Floyd was killed and the BLM protests start. And I live in DC, and so it was, I mean, quite intense, especially the first couple of days. And not long after the first couple of days, the National Guard is deployed. And at the time, I was living, right next to the Capitol, and so you get it all right there. And so I remember just asking the Lord because you're confronted with something new, and it's divisive, and there's lots of sides, and it's heated, and there's buildings being set on fire, and there's people, there's a lot. And I said, Lord, how do I respond? And I just felt like he said, you live in this city, you love this city, by default, even if I didn't yet, if I'm choosing to live there, I'm going to choose to love it, and bless where I live. And you love this city, and the people of this city are crying out. The least you could do is go and listen. And so my first approach was just, I'm going to show up to the protests and just ask people, like, why are you protesting? Like, tell me your story. What brought you out here today? And the first couple of days, I remember that had me leaving in tears, really. I ended up getting to meet just, yeah, really precious people that had very intense stories, and they would tell me stories about how their brother was killed by the police, or their dad, or something, very personal. And so I did my best to just listen and just weep with people who were weeping, which is always sometimes kind of different. There was one day, there was a girl, and I just remember I saw her, and she's screaming at the police, and there's a line of, like, they're in their riot gear. It's pretty intimidating, and she's screaming like obscenities, and I just looked at that and I thought, yikes, I don't know how I can help that, and I just felt like the Lord, he always brings it way more simple. He says, why does someone scream? And I thought, well, because you want to be heard. And I just felt like he said, do you think she feels heard when she's screaming at a bunch of men in masks? Like, she doesn't feel heard. So even this process she's going through, it's not solving anything, even in her own heart. Now what can you do to help? And I realized, okay, I can go be someone who hears her at the very least. And so I went over, remember I tapped her on the shoulder, and she turns to me and she's like, what the F, like dropping, sorry. And she just started screaming at me. And I thought for a moment, I was like, if I didn't have a healthy understanding of, like, all this isn't going on me, it goes on Jesus, like, if I wasn't more secure, this would be pretty tough. But I just listened to her for a long time, and it kept going, and it kept going, and it kept going. And eventually she ran out of steam, and she just looked at me, and I didn't know what to do. And I put my arms out, and she just hugged me, and she started crying in my arms. And I just held her, and I said, hey, I know you have a lot of pain. It's okay. You just let the pain out. It's okay. There's really only one that can heal your pain. I just prayed for her. And after that, I left, and I walked away, and I was with two friends, and we saw this group of police officers, and we said, well, let's go talk to them. And so we end up talking to them. We all get in a circle and pray, and we heard their stories. Like, what is this like from your side? What's been going on? You've been a police officer in this city for a long time. And then as we were walking away from that, I was just about to my car, and a man approached me, and he said, hey, what are you doing out here? And I was like, who are you? And he kind of opens his jacket and it shows a press badge. He wrote for The Economist. It was a White House press badge. And so he said, I write for The Economist and I saw you. And first you were talking to that girl with the protest side. And then you were talking to the police. So like, whose side are you on? You know? And I was just reminded of the, story in Joshua 5, where the angel, the captain of the army of the Lord, comes down to Joshua, and Joshua asks him, are you for us or are you for them? And the angel says, no. Like, you're not asking the right question. Are you on our side or are you on their side? The angel says, no, but I am with the Lord. And I thought that with the Economist guy, he was like, are you with the protesters or are you with the police? And I just thought, I'm just here to like speak peace, to love people, to meet people where they're at the best that I can. And it was funny because he ended up writing an article about that, and my boss at work ended up seeing it, and then I ended up having to talk to my coworkers all about this. But sorry, I'm making this story long. Long story short, at the protests, was out there one day, just doing my thing, listening to people. I would go after work, pray for people, and I remember everyone was chanting something, change the system, something. And I thought the practical part of me came in. And I was like, all right, Lord, like, is chanting going to change something? I need to, I feel like I need to just do something right now. Like, and what do you want to be done? Not what is the crowd chanting for? Like, what do you want? And a picture popped into my mind of a house that I knew was about 2 blocks over. And I felt like I saw in my picture, there was like a young boy sitting in front of it. And just the thought came to my mind, go help that young boy. It's the fish and loaves thing. I don't know how to fix what everyone is chanting for. I don't know how to fix the government or if it even needs fixing or what needs fixing. That's way beyond my pay grade. But I have, some fish and loaves. There's this boy in front of this house, So I go over there and this guy, there really is a guy sitting in front of the house. He's smoking some weed. He's just chilling. I go up and I'm like, hey, can I help you somehow? And he's absolutely freaked out because he's like, why are you talking to me? And, I tell him, well, I had a picture in my mind and I don't know. I feel like maybe you're the boy in the picture. And so he's like, and he goes, well, actually, man, my brother was supposed to drive me home, but he's on house arrest. So he had to dip and now I don't have a ride. And this guy was probably about 15. And I said, okay, well, I have a car. I can do that. I said, I can drive you home. And we start driving home, and on the way, I'm still praying for people, stopped and prayed for some National Guard people. And I remember he kind of cursed at me, and he's like, why are you doing that? Like, they're the enemy. And, I said, hey, you're coming in my car. We pray for everybody. And so he gets in the car and we're talking, and I just hear a lot about his life. It's like 14 different kids living in one house with one mom and 4 different dads. And 3 of those dads were in prison. And it's, once again, I start to feel that feeling of overwhelmed, of just like, this problem is, once again, just like with the chanting, too big for me to solve. I don't know what to do. And just kind of the thought comes, what he needs is family. Most people need family. Psalm 68, I will put the lonely in families. And so I asked him if it was okay. I didn't kidnap him, but I said, instead of taking him home, I took him to my pastor's house. And I said, let's just go have family dinner. And we just ate, and it was the most normal time. And we prayed for him at the end, and he got to know them. And when I took him home that night, I met all the other kids that lived in that house. And so the story of the house church, basically what happened is, bit by bit, I kept going back to that house. I kept trying to, after work, I'd go help them get a ride to the laundromat, or there was these 2 little girls. I would tutor them after school. I just kept trying to invest in their family. And it eventually just grew and grew until got to know a lot of members in that community, and just thought, okay, we need to have some sort of house church. And so me and another friend, we ended up starting a house church. And everyone in that house church had either recently come out of prison, recently come out of homelessness, or was just someone random we had met throughout the city. And it was one of the most random house churches I've ever been a part of. We had one girl who had schizophrenia, 2 different transgender individuals started showing up, and we would just worship, and we just get the image of Psalm 23, where it says, Jesus sets the table even in the presence of enemies. And he comes and meets us. So we thought, okay, if we can just meet with Jesus, if we can eat the truth, eat what he feeds us, and we'll just keep going. And so it ended up being quite an experience.
How long did it go on for?
Went on for a couple years. eventually I started traveling a lot with the anti-trafficking stuff that I started doing
Mhm.
in Ukraine in 2022. And so me and my friend, we passed off the house church to two other people, and then they led it for a year. And then I think eventually what they did is they kind of broke it up to go into other house churches within the Antioch community. And so a lot of the members of that original house church still go to church on Sunday.
Mhm.
But it was definitely a learning experience. We have a lot of fun stories and a lot of amazing stories from it. I used to, since a lot of our individuals who would come, they didn't have a car, I took the seats out of the back of my minivan and I would have to drive around and pick everyone up to come. But to fit everyone in, I'd have to take the seats out. And so, like, one of the guys that came every week, he lived under a bridge. So I would just meet him under the bridge and we'd pick him up and then we'd go to the next house. And um, yeah, just made it work however it would.
Do you think any of those homeless people found a way to put themselves back in community?
Mm. Yeah, some people for sure. Like, there's definitely some beautiful stories from it. For example, this one girl, okay, so she wasn't homeless, but during this whole time, I was really just wanting to invest in DC because I know there's a lot of Christians that come in, they pray for DC, which is great. But we're really praying for the federal government, and there's a whole city here. And
Mm.
so I went to some of the local high school guidance counselors and just said, hey, like, if you have a student, particularly, I was thinking maybe teenage girls, that you feel like they're about to get expelled or dropped out. I said, before you expel them, like, even if it's a last ditch thing, like, would you connect them to me? I just want to maybe attempt to be a last chance for some people. And I really had on my heart at the time teen moms. So I said, especially if you have any teen moms. And the guidance counselor, he ended up giving me a list of all the teen moms in the school. And so what I did is he gave me their address and I drove to all their houses and I dropped off like a basket of supplies and kind of use that as a peace offering to open the door, because they don't know me. I don't work for the school, and so some of them never responded, didn't really trust or want to have a relationship, but several of them did. And so started hosting them also at my house. They started joining that other Bible study. And one of those girls, it's a really sweet story to me. She lived with her dad. He was abusive. She was pregnant at age 15. There's a lot going on, and it was pretty dynamic. One day I was on a work call and suddenly the police entered my house from behind. I was like, what's going on? And they said that she was missing, and the dad, because he knew I worked with her a lot, thought maybe she could be at my house. So the police were breaking into my house, and I'm telling my boss, I'm sorry, I have to get off this call right now. And obviously she wasn't with me, but we found her and just continue to walk with her and learned a lot about, patience when you're like, I just want to fix this situation right now. And you just couldn't. Sometimes all you could do, your hands were so tied. You just had to pray. You just had to be there. You had to do what you could, maybe one night a week she could stay at our house or something. Um, but eventually she ended up getting pregnant again. Child Protective Services ended up taking her and she ended up at a foster home. And I remember just going out to visit her at that foster home. The first one wasn't great. And then the second one, it was out in Maryland, and I went to visit her, and we're sitting there, and we were both just crying because it felt like this moment of peace come that she had made it. I mean, she was just crying, telling me, "Hey, the family said they're going to help me with my baby. They're going to get me childcare. They're going to help me so I can finish high school." She was like, "I'm going to make it. I'm going to get out of here." And I just had never heard her say, "I'm going to make it." Like, to hear her believe. We were just crying, and I thought, this is awesome.
That's an awesome story. Thank
Yeah,
you.
it was cool. Mhm.
I don't know. I think that's a good place to end. But do you have anything else you'd like to tell my listeners?
Hmm. Trying to think.
What do you see as changes that need to be made in engineering, in
Hmm.
history? Oh, I was going to talk a little bit about um, nuclear energy. So in
Oh.
I remember this now. So there's a small truck-sized
Mhm.
nuclear company that take nuclear power on a truck,
Oh.
and it can't melt down. It's too
Mhm.
small.
Mhm.
It can't
Mhm.
melt down, but it can be of uh, great help to people in, well, all kinds of different places. That's coming in
Yeah.
terms. nuclear power that's coming. Do you know of any
Yeah.
companies that have that type of
Y-
technology?
Yeah, I've been out of the nuclear sphere for quite some time now, but I've always remained interested in it. I think that might be like an SMR, which trying to remember what that stands for. It's like a small modular reactor.
Yeah.
And different companies are making them now. These small ones that can be deployed, and you think about disaster zones or somewhere where they just need energy fast, because energy truly is almost like a currency of this world. You want to see a city fall, you just cut off the power for 3 days. And so
Mm-hmm.
yeah, these SMRs, it's really cool. And they've been using like small thermonuclear reactors or other modular reactors for deep space travel for quite some time now, and different companies are developing better ones. But yeah, I think nuclear energy, it really potentially could solve a lot of our problems. I know it, saying the word nuclear, it's a little bit of a trigger word, of course, because of bombs and World War II, and then Chernobyl, like different accidents that have happened along
Right.
the way.
Right.
But if you really dig into and I'm no means claiming to be an expert, but if you really dig into some of the science around it and the true statistics of why did Fukushima happen, why did Chernobyl happen, what safety measures do we have in place now, what percentage of failures actually happen versus reality versus the amount of issues that happen with any other technology we use. Of course, people would say it's because the effects of a potential nuclear disaster is so much larger, and I can understand that, but they really are a lot safer than people think. And of course, like if somehow we could solve fusion, that would seemingly solve most of our problems, energy
What,
wise.
what do you think about these small reactors that they don't melt down? Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I imagine that they're, like I said, I haven't been tracking with a lot of it, but I imagine it's happening at a small enough scale that they can control the reaction, and it probably has a small enough amount of fuel or like a heat dissipation, something that if it
Mm-hmm.
were to
Get
start to,
problem. Right.
yeah, it just can't. Like if heat
Mm-hmm.
were to start to build, like it just would dissipate, or it would run out of fuel or something like that. So
Yeah, well, I think that sounds like such a good idea for places, well, for anywhere really, but for places that don't have enough energy right now for what the
yeah,
people need.
yes, yeah,
Mhm.
I
So it's
agree.
that's coming. We have so many good things that are happening in the world.
Yes,
We often focus on what is falling apart,
yes,
and you need to focus on
hmm
what's falling apart, but I think you have to give a moment also of gratitude for the things that are, we
yeah,
forget gratitude, and that's
yes,
not good because without gratitude, then you kind of get stuck in your own wheel of
hmm
thoughts. To get yourself outside of yourself, gratitude is a very good
yes,
practice.
yes.
And we can be grateful for all the people who are still trying,
hmm
right? You're still trying to invent new technologies or
Yeah.
even improve the old technologies. And so
hmm
there's all these things to be grateful for
Yes.
instead of complaining about what you think isn't going
Yeah.
exactly right now. I mean, nothing is ever going exactly right.
Right. Right. Once you understand sin and the kingdom of light and the kingdom of darkness, you actually can walk in a little bit more peace, because you're not waiting for. Um, I'm not expecting this to be heaven on earth. The Bible is clear that's not happening right now. And so, like you said, once you understand that, you can emotionally deal with it a bit more, and then you can press into gratitude, like God says, you Psalm 100, if you want to enter my gates, enter it with thanksgiving. And so, and when you think about the technologies that are being developed, and it really is amazing. And of course, sometimes it brings up fear in people, but sometimes I imagine, I'm like, when the internet first came, or when this first came, I'm sure people had similar fears as well, and yet we've dealt with it along the way,
Mhm.
just as a society. And so yeah, it is really cool.
Yeah, it is very cool. I saw that you had worked in nuclear, so that small story came to mind.
Yeah, it's a
But
cool
I can't
story.
think of anything else that I've got except for, I guess, you're in a new job now,
hmm
and you must have plans for life going
hmm
forward. Do you have
hmm
anything to share with us about those plans?
going forward. Yeah, I think I'm nothing set in stone. I started a new job within my same company in March, and so it's been really exciting adjusting into that. And then as of right now, I feel like I've been in this season where I'm trying to discern if the Lord is potentially drawing me away from DC. I've lived in DC for about 5 years, and so like I said, nothing set in stone, but London and Miami often come to mind. And so,
I see. Well,
yes, my
all the best. All the
yeah,
best with that.
thank you, thank you, thank you. And then oh, I guess upcoming in a couple weeks, I'll be at the Olympics. Unbound Now, the anti-trafficking organization I serve with, we're have some partnerships going with the government in terms of the Olympics and just working with Paris in preparing then to help with LA in 2028. And so I'll be at the Olympics in 2 weeks, which will be awesome as well.
Right. Wow. That's going to be something.
Yeah.
Good luck with that.
Thank
Mm-hmm.
you. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Hmm.
Trying to think of anything else. I'll say one last Bible story. You don't have to include this, but was thinking about this morning. Was thinking a lot about the story of Lot and Sodom and Gomorrah in terms of living, especially living in DC. Sometimes people reference it as Sodom and Gomorrah, or, and you're like, how do you be the light in a dark place? And I think a story that convicts me often is I think about, so when Abraham, he goes to God and God tells him, hey, I'm going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. And Abraham starts interceding, saying, well, would you save it if there was just 50 righteous people? And God says, sure. He says, what about 45? And he's like, sure. And he like whittles him all the way down, 40, 35, 30, 25, like by multiples of 5, 20, 15. It's almost painstaking until he gets to 10. And then he just stops. And for some reason, maybe it was the engineer in me that like bothered me. I'm like, why did you go by multiples of 5? We had to read all of this until 10 and you didn't go down to 5. Like, did you really want the city to be saved or not? I would have gone down to the smallest number if I was really trying to save the city. So I was like, why 10? And then, it clicked. I'm not saying this is definite, but my thoughts around it is, Lot is Abraham's nephew, and Lot lives in Sodom and Gomorrah. Mm-hmm. Abraham's concern with God destroying Sodom and Gomorrah was probably largely tied to saving his family. He says, hey, my nephew's there. And if you count the members of Lot's family that are listed there, it comes out to 10. And I started to realize, I think Abraham was interceding on behalf of his family. So the next thing that convicted me, one, I'm like, okay, I need to intercede for my family, even if they're not in the city I live in. And two, God agreed, I won't destroy the city for 10. Lot has 10 family members there. God still destroys the city. So like, what's going on here? And it starts to make you realize, my first takeaway was, wow, because God still saved Lot. He just didn't save the city. So that must have meant that Lot was righteous, but he wasn't righteous enough to save his city. He was righteous enough that it only impacted his sphere, but it wasn't enough to actually impact what's around him. And I started to get convicted. Where do I do that at? It's like, yeah, I'm keeping my own life well, but I'm not reaching out to the city around me. That was my first thought. But then if you keep reading through the Bible, it's always a constant evolving. I went to 2 Peter 2, and it says right there, I think it's 2:7, it says, Lot was a righteous man. And then I was torn. I said, okay, was he righteous, but in this gray area of righteousness, that he was righteous, but just not enough to save his city? Or was Lot righteous, but there still wasn't 10 righteous people in that city? And it almost starts to show you, like, if Lot was righteous, but he failed to disciple his own family, then he failed to save the whole city. And so I think that's just another thing I've been pondering recently, of like the power of, if Lot had even just discipled his own family, if he had discipled his kids, if he, not just him walking in righteousness, but him and his family, an entire city could have been saved. And so I'm like, God, what could that look like here? That if we have righteous families, that a whole city could be saved.
Oh, that's very interesting. Yeah. So family feuds, right? Family feuds. That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
If you have a family feud and you're not saving your family because there's something impassable that's happened between you. You have
Mm,
to overcome that and find forgiveness.
mm-hmm.
It's about forgiveness, yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
within families, and then
so true.
that can save the city. Oh, that's very interesting.
Yeah, I love that. The forgiveness. Yes.
Mm,
Yeah, bitterness will just eat up both your own heart and relationships.
yeah, yeah, right.
Forgiveness, like the antidote. Yeah,
Yeah. Mm.
well,
Thank you.
of course. Thanks for having me.
Oh, wow. It's really nice. Well, I hope we can see each other once again if you're still in DC when I come next.
Yes, yes. I'm sure with my job I'll always be in and out. But yes, would love to see you the next time you come.